all the classes you teach, and we'll just take a look at that in just a second. I'll introduce myself first as you're kind of doing that. My name is Jesse Tanetta. I am the program manager here for Echoes and Reflections. I have bachelor's degrees in Catholic theology and in history from Emmanuel College, and I also have a master's degree in Holocaust and Genocide Studies from Gratz College. My master's thesis was on post-Holocaust theology, and I'm a current PhD student as well. I was also a former teacher in Catholic schools. I taught at two, one in Boston, where I'm from, and one in New York City as well. So that's me. As we kind of start, I want to just mention a really cool tool here. And so if you take a look at this word cloud that's been created from your responses, and again, the bigger, if you haven't used this before, the bigger the words, the more people put it in. So as one would expect, a lot of social studies and a lot of English. We also have religion, so I also taught religion and history. So that's really cool. Some math teachers, which is really interesting and awesome and cool and great. It's one of the things I really love about Catholic schools is for those of you with multiple interests, you always get to teach a little bit of everything and also get to do a little bit of everything. I always made the joke that I had a master's degree, but I was also taking the trash out after an event or something like that. So something that's kind of special to Catholic schools. As we start, I'm sure that you're at least a little bit familiar about Echoes and Reflections. We're a partnership between the Anti-Defamation League, the USC Shoah Foundation, and Yad Vashem. We've been around since 2005, and we've helped over 85,000 teachers here in the United States with professional development around Holocaust education. So we have a full 10 lessons, including an 11th lesson on contemporary anti-Semitism. We do various professional development like online courses, in-person programs when that was still a thing, as well as webinars like this. So plenty of things that we do. And as we start, we always start here with our principles of pedagogy. And so I want you to just take 30 seconds here as you kind of settle in for this 1 hour sprint. I will be honest and tell you it's a 1 hour sprint today. To take a look at these principles of pedagogy and think of one that you do really well. It's a strength of your teaching, and maybe one that hasn't been a focus before. Maybe you feel weak about it, or it hasn't been kind of centered in some of the lessons that you've taught. We're going to do plenty of these today. We're definitely going to provide a background on the history of anti-Semitism. If we're thinking about the Catholic Church and Christianity, about the history of anti-Jewish teaching that really morphs into anti-Semitism. We'll teach the human story with a couple of good examples, fostering empathy, hopefully encouraging critical thinking. And then I really want to highlight this, ensure a supportive learning environment. This is a really difficult topic, and we want to make sure that we're treating it with the respect it deserves, with the care, and also being careful when we're teaching this. So we're not throwing up PowerPoint slides of corpses and dead bodies and emaciated skeletons, but we're really kind of talking about actions and people and what happened, and really making sure that we give our students time to process, to cope, to debrief, to journal, to get in touch with their emotions and how they're feeling as well, are all really important things of ensuring that supportive learning and environment. And one that I think that for those of you in Catholic schools, which is probably most of you, is a really huge advantage that you have in building that culture that comes in Catholic schools. So one that we really want to focus on today and really all the time. And so what are we doing today? We'll take a little look at first century Palestine and kind of the creation of Christianity and its split from Judaism. We'll take a look at some of the anti-Semitic tropes and anti-Jewish teachings that Christian teachings, Christian Europe, really helped foment and push and progress and really lay the foundation for the anti-Semitism that's coming in Nazi Germany and even through today. We'll look at the role of the church in their relationship with Nazi Germany and kind of the kind of macro level view of what's going on. We'll just look at what the church has done to make amends and change the relationship between Jews and Christians in the last kind of 60 years since the Second Vatican Council. And then we'll take a look at about one example of a rescuer, more a rescuer that credits their Christian belief and their religious views for the reason that they helped Jews survive. So that's the hope that we're doing today. So it should be fun. And so as we kind of get started, we want to kind of look at these foundations of anti-Jewish belief and really ground our context and knowledge into looking at why we can look at scripture and we can look at early Christianity as being particularly anti-Jewish. So giving it some context and some kind of historical information here, which doesn't justify or even excuse, but just gives us a broader picture of why this was taught the way it was taught in the early days, and then how that is taken to really push anti-Jewish belief, especially as we progress through the Middle Ages. So if we think of Jesus of Nazareth, he's living a Jew, he's an observant Jew. In that time period, Jews are not thinking that their Messiah will be one that Jesus's ministry is about. So it won't be a Messiah that is a heavenly or spiritual being. It's not going to be God made man. They're expecting a military and a political hero to reestablish the kingdom of Israel in the Davidic kind of tradition and heritage. And so Jesus's life is actually really not that unique in this time period. There are plenty of prophets that come about, that rabble-rouse, that gain followers, that challenge authority, and then they are executed by the Romans. All of their followers are executed by the Romans, and then people forget about them. The thing that makes Jesus unique is that even after his death, after the death of the close apostles, all 12 will be martyred, except for John, who will be poisoned. He'll survive, and then people will feel threatened to someone who survives a poisoning, and he'll be sent into exile instead. But people keep talking about Jesus after that. That's what makes it special, and that's what makes it unique, and that's what makes him the most consequential person in all of history, probably. I could make that argument pretty easily. But all these early followers of Jesus saw Jesus as a Jew and saw Christianity as a distinctly Jewish movement. So I always like to kind of explain this to my students as they were Jews 6 days a week, and then on Sunday mornings they came together and shared the Eucharist, the Last Supper, and all of that. In those early times, so we're talking about the first century, we're talking from the death of Jesus, which is dated somewhere between AD 27 to 36-ish up until the 50s. There's a big debate about whether Christianity will be Jewish, like they are, and Jewish Christians, or can we baptize non-Jewish Gentiles? The decision is made to baptize Gentiles. Now they also continue and push to kosher and other Jewish traditions that will fall off from Christianity eventually. But in the Council of Jerusalem, which is in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 15, is dated around 50. And that's when they make the decision that, yes, you don't have to be Jewish in order to be Christian, that we can baptize Gentiles, and that they don't have to be circumcised if they're males. And so here's this photograph of, or a painting of the baptism of Cornelius, who is believed to be the first Gentile who is baptized. Cornelius, who was a Roman soldier. Great scene in the Bible that the History Channel did, the 10 episode of the baptism of Cornelius. And so after the Council of Jerusalem, Christianity starts to break away slowly from Judaism. So now that non-Jews can become Christian, that starts to separate these communities. We also have a lot of turmoil and chaos going on in Jerusalem and in Judea in this first century Palestine, which is, controlled by the Romans. The Romans will go in and ransack and kind of reconquer Israel and Jerusalem in 70. That includes the destruction of the temple, which continues to not exist today outside of the Western Wall. And so now Judaism has to face a fundamental shift from being centered on the temple, which was the center of Jewish life, towards rabbinic Judaism, towards local synagogues, and towards a life outside of Jerusalem and eventually outside of Israel. And so it's in that kind of turmoil that the Gospels begin being written. So we're talking about Mark is the first Gospel written somewhere in that 65 to 75 range. You have Matthew and Luke written after that. somewhere in the 80 to 90 range. And then the Gospel of John will be the last one that is written. Most scholars date that around 90 to 100, but some as late as 110 or even 120. So we're kind of looking at, 100 years of really consequential issues that a lot is going on here. And so, we're going to find anti-Jewish teachings in the scriptures, and today we're kind of just focused on the Gospels, and I just wanted to give you a couple of examples and some context. So the temple is destroyed, Christianity and Judaism is splitting up, non-Jews are being baptized and becoming Christians, and with this kind of shift comes a schism where these Jewish Christians that saw Christianity as a Jewish movement are being kicked out of their synagogues. They're being separated from Judaism. They are being isolated. They're kicked out of their communities. They're kicked out of their families and their friends and the life that they knew. Remember, they thought and they believed that they were devout Jews and that the Messiah had come. And here, everything that they had ever known, their families, their friends, their communities, were kicking them out. So obviously, they're angry. They're feel betrayed, right? The other kind of impact of this, besides that kind of personal and communal, is that now Christians are now vulnerable to Roman persecution. Now, there are tons of stories, obviously, of the Romans, Pax Romana being really vicious and brutal against those that stood against Rome. But one thing that Romans did is that they appreciated and respected the antiquity of Judaism. And so for Jews, they were mostly safe as long as they followed all the Roman rules and paid extra taxes. But when Christians get kicked out of Judaism, they are no longer protected. They are a new religion. They see Jesus as God, which means they don't see Caesar as God, which means they don't recognize Roman gods. And so they are traitors. They are, against the Roman Empire. And so that opens them up to persecution and death. And this is where you get Christian martyrs in this first 300 years before the Emperor Constantine. Christians are in danger. There are not nearly as many martyrs as the Catholic Church has taught and professed. We're probably talking about a few hundred and not thousands. But still, that is the context that Mark and Matthew and Luke and especially John are writing about, and really having issues with the Jewish community, kicking them out and making them vulnerable to Roman persecution. And so I picked two quotes here just to kind of give you kind of the most famous, clearly anti-Jewish and really influential texts, and then give you one that's a little bit more with context. So this is the famous one from the book of Matthew. So in this, we're in the middle of the trial of Jesus. This is when Pontius Pilate, who's the Roman prefect, he's the one in charge of this. Obviously, Jews at that time are not autonomous. They can't crucify people. They don't have the power to do that, but Romans do. And so it's Pilate's decision, and Pilate washes his hands. And in the book of Matthew, the crowd responds. The crowd, which is Jewish, in Matthew's statements here, his blood be upon us and on our children. And so we have, from this text, we'll have anti-Jewish teachings that Jews are obsessed with blood. We'll have the deicide claim that Jews are Christ killers, that they killed the Christ, that they killed Jesus. We'll have Jews as being evil, as being in line with the devil, right? Like, who's killing the Son of God unless it's the devil, right? So all of that coming from this text, and it was one that will follow Christian-Jewish relations through to today. This other one comes from the Gospel of John. John, most notably, the most anti-Jewish, again, writing it last, 90 to 100. He's going to reference the Jews 63 times as a collective group, and he's going to do it in a very overtly hostile way 31 times. So just a clearly anti-Jewish lens in the Gospel of John. And I picked this one because it's not overtly obvious. Like, we don't have that clear anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic trope, but it gives you some context. So from John here, chapter 16, they, the Jews, will put you out of the synagogues. Indeed, an hour is coming when those who kill you will think that by doing so, they are offering worship to God. And so we have John talking about being kicked out of the synagogues, talking about Jews being the ones to kill you, so being that deicide claim again, and also kind of delegitimizing Judaism as a religion, thinking that, that Jews are doing this to worship God, right? And so it's a nice, like, most important 100 years of human life creation, maybe, in a slide. And I want to just kind of push into that with this one slide, and then I want to get some images and get some of your thoughts as we kind of like burn through a lot of material that I hope is new, but also has you shaking your head like, oh, that makes sense. So we're after those tumultuous hundreds. We're after, in the next few hundred years, and when Christianity really starts to become Christian Europe after 300, and Charlemagne in the 800s, and the Middle Ages, and the rise of popes, and the Pope being really the most powerful person in the world, that the existence of Jews and their unwillingness to convert to Christianity is a constant challenge to the legitimacy of Christianity. Christianity is pushing, and the Catholic Church is pushing, that they are the one true religion. And they're also talking about how Jesus was a Jew that came to preach to the Jews first and then to the Gentiles after. And yet the Jews are the ones who are rejecting Christianity. And so that is just a constant challenge, that, like, well, if you really were the one true religion, like, how come the Jews don't believe it, right? And so that really pushes Christians, and there's plenty of teachings that exist during this time period, even in some of the letters of Paul, that Christians need Jews to live near them because they have a distinct need to convert Jews to Christianity. We see this today in some of the far-right evangelical Protestant movements of the United States of, once all the Jews convert to Christianity, then Jesus will come again, right? Which is really dangerous, right? It delegitimizes the Jewish religion. And so in the same time period, the Catholic Church is preaching supersessionism, basically that Christianity replaced Judaism, that the New Testament, the New Covenant, right, that's what Testament means, replaced the old Mosaic one, which invalidates the covenant that God had made with the Jews. So again, delegitimizing Judaism, and in line with, the Gospel of John. And this supersessionist belief continues until 65. And so I have a quote here. I didn't pick one from the Middle Ages. I could have picked thousands of them. I picked one from 1943, which maybe some of you were alive and remember this. 1943, Pope Pius XII is writing, by the death of our Redeemer, the New Testament took the place of the old law, which had been abolished. So really kind of delegitimizing Judaism as a religion, delegitimizing the Hebrew Bible, delegitimizing the covenant that God had made with Jews. And so that is the context of Christianity's relationship with Judaism, literally for 1900 years. And one kind of important thing that we see in the Middle Ages is that Jews are living among Christians because Christians are trying to convert them. But then there are also other laws that are put in place in Christian Europe. One of them is that Christians are not allowed to charge interest to other Christians when they loan money, which means that you have there's no reason to loan money. There's no benefit. There's no advantage. I give you a huge sum of money and you pay me back the same amount of money. Like, you could just not pay me back, right? I'm not getting any interest. I don't have any benefit to lending you money. And so Jews are forced to certain professions. So the banking industry, trading industry, they are forced to live in certain places. Some of those places are behind gates. Maybe the etymology of the word ghetto, which is the Italian word for foundry, because in Venice, Jews are allowed to live in the old foundry factory. And so with that comes more anti-Jewish beliefs, anti-Jewish teachings that the Nazis will pick up. They're not creating it. They're just taking the same things that people believe anyway, that this anti-Jewish beliefs and these anti-Semitism going into the late 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s are things that people just believe. It is latent in their society that they believe these things. I always use this example that, have you ever talked to an older person, your grandparents, something like that, and they say something that just makes you cringe, that you didn't know that that's what they believe, that they are very nice people, right? I can remember vividly my grandmother telling me about the nice colored gentleman that helped her at the grocery store, right? And so people are believing these anti-Semitic tropes, and the Christian Church and the Catholic Church are, guilty, are responsible for some of this. Europe is Christian Europe throughout the Middle Ages, and yet these anti-Jewish teachings and tropes really dominate. So these are images from the Nazi era. So on the left, you have the clearly Jewish man with the large nose, and from the title that is from a children's book. This is from The Poisonous Mushroom in 1938. This is in our contemporary anti-Semitism unit, and it talks about the only God of the Jews is money. Right? He's sitting on a giant pile of gold. The image to your right is a newspaper. It's a front page of a newspaper, Der Stürmer, from 1939. If your German's not great, maybe you can see ritual murder is what's written in red. The bottom says the Jews are our misfortune. And so again, this obsession that Jews are obsessed with blood and the blood of Christians, right? And here you have a cabal picture of the blood libel, the idea or the belief that Jews would steal Christian children and use their blood to bake matzah. And so you have this kind of horrific depiction, and that's the front page news. And so I want to get some of your thoughts. That is plenty of me talking. So in the chat box, I want you to take a look at this. This is again another front page article from Der Stürmer. And in the chat box, so again, make sure it says to, and then you've changed it to everyone so that we can all benefit from your thoughts. I want you to take a look at this picture. And I want to give you like 15, 20 seconds to kind of digest it, look throughout the picture and all of that. And then just a really simple, what do you see? So just in the chat, quick, make sure it's to everyone. What are some of the things you see in this illustration? Good, so the crosses, right? A clearly Christian symbol. An Aryan figure on the cross, right? So good. Clearly Aryan, German, should make you obviously think of Jesus on the cross. Good. So we have this view of the person that is just stereotypically Jewish, right? Sneering at the person being crucified. I love that word, sneering. That's such a great word to explain this, right? Christians blaming Jews for the death of Jesus. Good. Lots of stereotypes. You have the sign on the top. Good. Yeah, that he seems pleased, right? Sneering, pleased, clearly Jewish with the big nose. He looks heavier too, if we just want to look at the size of his head, and goes into those beliefs that the Jews are unhealthy, poison, right? They poison the well, they bring the Black Death, they spread coronavirus, another one of those anti-Semitic tropes that doesn't seem to ever end. Oh my goodness, awesome in the chat. Just saw 25 new messages and I freaked out. Yeah, the differences in the two bodies. Good, I'm glad you saw that. Taking pleasure, right? The German, more beautiful, right? He's supposed to be getting killed, but he's good. The Aryan figure being higher, larger, higher, looking down, right? That elevated view of him. It's kind of like the hero shot that you see in movies. Good. I mean, clearly, right? That's awesome. Thank you so much. That was great, right? So, one of these things that, this is, and we're going to talk about Nazism as hating Christianity and really being atheistic, but they're not stupid, right? And one of the powerful things about propaganda that you really need to make sure and be careful with in your classrooms is that propaganda works. It just works. And so when we're teaching about anti-Semitism, or we're teaching about propaganda, we have to really make sure that we're being clear about, these tropes, these anti-Semitic tropes, that they are baseless and illogical and not supported by evidence and irrational, right? Good. I love that one, Cynthia. That we only see the one kind of person here, but there are lots of crosses that, it's not just a single person that is being persecuted or killed here. And obviously if we're thinking about Jesus, perfect, God made man, the Christ, Messiah, all those kind of statements we think of innocence, right? The innocent being crucified. So many religious undertones that everyone would be able to pick up with in this German society, right? And as we think about the Nazis and their view about propaganda, about religion, they're atheistic. I mean, Nazi Germany, you're not worshiping anybody except for Hitler and the way, the ideology is the purpose. There's no God there. And yet Germany and the rest of Europe are firmly Christian. And Nazism utilizes this Christian anti-Jewish teachings and the anti-Semitism that's around. And I know I've been kind of throwing those words back and forth, trying to differentiate between, the anti-Jewish, anti-religion of the first 1800 years of this 2 millennia, and the anti-Semitism that comes with racism, that comes with eugenics, that comes with kind of those, bad blood. So even if that want to trace that back to the Spanish Inquisition of the 1400s of, being different than just religious practices, right? Because the Nazis at the end of the day don't actually care what religion the Jews are. If they're Jewish, they're marked for death. And so, Nazi ideology is atheistic. They don't care about religion, but it's a tool. And they're not going to not use tools to, inflame their bases, rally their sides, and hate Jews. So they will use that imagery, as you clearly really picked out really well in that article. And so when Hitler becomes chancellor in January 1933, he obviously begins consolidating power. There's lots of things that are going on in this time period of the early 30s, we say at 30 to 35. Some of those are laws that are restricting the life of the Catholic Church and the Christian churches within Germany. One of them, just for example, is restricting the movement of money, of funds. So not being allowed to send money outside of Germany. So, churches take up collections to help, missionaries and, other places and organizations that are struggling or people that are in need. And, in Europe, that's not that people are traveling, but obviously it's very easy to go from one country to another, much easier than it is to go to another country when you live in the US, right? It's just so much smaller. So that's just one of those laws that are constricting some of the things that Christians want to do. And another one is that children, male children are mandatory to attend Hitler Youth meetings. And they are held on Sunday mornings. And they are held on Sunday mornings on purpose so that the children would go to Hitler Youth meetings, not to church, right? We also have a little bit of violence against Christians here. Nothing that even remotely compares to the violence that Jews are facing sporadically and also institutionally and systemically. But we're getting a little bit of that, Christianity is not really accepted or welcomed here as Nazism rises. That Nazism is the true religion. And so if we think about the kind of stature or place in Nazi Germany for the Catholic Church specifically, they're in a very small minority. I mean, obviously there are more Catholics in Germany than there are Jews, but Catholicism is, Germany is a largely Protestant country at this point, right? It's the home of Luther and that movement of the Protestant Reformation. And so Pope Pius XI, who was the Pope at the time until 1939, and the ambassador, so to speak, of the Vatican to Germany at this point, who is Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, who will become Pope Pius XII, negotiate with Hitler and the Nazi Party to sign a concordant, an agreement. It's basically a treaty between a major religion and a government, that the government will handle the governing and the religion will handle the religion, and they'll stay out of each other's way. And when we think of this, Reichskonkordat, that's what it's called, we think of it as a major victory for Hitler. It cleared the way for Hitler to, be able to pass some really important policies to his rise of power and his abuse of power. But on the other side, it also kind of affords the Catholic Church a little bit of protection. There is a belief in this time period, not just among Christians and Catholics, but among politicians, that, Hitler's just trying to, gain his own power, or he just wants to reunite the Germans. So that's why it'll be okay for the Anschluss to take Austria. That's okay why, we allow him to take the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, right? So it's not just the church that are making treaties thinking that that is the best way to protect them, right? We have hindsight now, but they didn't know it then. And this is not a unique concordat. This is only one of 12 that Pope Pius XI signs. He signs it with Nazi Germany as a whole. He signs it with some of the German states, as well as other countries as well. So it's just a belief that, if we want to protect our church, if we want to protect our members, a treaty is a good way to do that. We'll stay out of politics, and they'll let us function. So that's kind of the push and pull and the strategy that's going on here. So not unique. Hitler does see it as a victory. The Christian churches, which I was just kind of thinking that I didn't include this, is they will protest and get an end to the T4 program, which is the euthanasia program of the late 30s. But it actually doesn't end. Hitler just moves it underground. So although Nazism is atheistic and really hates religion, they also recognize their populace, and rely on anti-Jewish teachings and anti-Semitic beliefs that Christianity has ingrained in people for thousands of years, as well as utilizing those symbols and those belief systems to further their own agenda. And so when we look at Pope Pius XII, so Pope Pius XI dies in 1939. There's talks that he was writing a stern condemnation of Nazism, but he dies in March or so of 39, so before the war starts. And Pope Pius XII is elected. Part of the reason that he's elected is because of his connection to Germany and the growth and power that Germany is clearly building in 39. They don't know the war's coming in September 1st, but there's good sense that it might. And Pius XII is a walking contradiction. So I do want to focus on a couple of his actions and his words, but just know that there's no firm, no matter how much you study this, you'll find plenty of examples of Pius XII advocating for Jewish relief. He helped thousands obtain visas to escape. Convents, monasteries, Catholic churches, Christian churches as well, provided refuge, took children in, tried to hide people, provided food, helped people in many, many ways. They also didn't stand in the way in many things. But Pope Pius XII has been credited with organizing and demanding the Catholic institutions around Rome to help the Jews of Rome during the Roman Roundup of October 16th, 1943. We can see this is hugely successful. Outside of Denmark, in terms of a rescue activity, about 1,000 Jews were captured on this day, but about 10,000 were saved, largely in monasteries, convents, Catholic churches, that kind of, literally sleeping in halls of monasteries. There's some really fantastic pictures. Maybe I should have grabbed one for you. So he's largely credited for that. He's clearly anti-Nazi, makes plenty of comments about how he hates Nazism, that it's atheistic, that it's evil. He also fears communism. So we also have to think about the larger kind of global scope. Communism is clearly atheistic, more so than Nazism is, because in communist Russia here, in the Soviet Union, they don't even allow people to have those churches, or that's the goal in their future. And similar to the United States, saw the Soviet Union as a greater enemy. But regardless of his actions, some of which are shrouded in mystery, he is decidedly, shamefully, and unfortunately silent in his public speeches and the condemnation of Nazism and the Holocaust. And so I want to look at his most famous speech. And just a quote from the very end, This speech is his Christmas message of 1942. It's his famous speech. It's about 45 minutes long. He is a very particular with his words. So, I think we can assume that this was well thought out and was a clear, decisive message from Pope Pius XII, as he's one to really be very careful with his choice of words. Just to give you some other kind of thoughts about 42, what's going on in December of 1942? Well, the final solution of the extermination of the Jewish people has been going on for almost 2 years now. Since the invasion of the Soviet Union on June 22nd, 1941, Jews have been murdered en masse. This is after the Wannsee Conference, which is in January of 1942. So we're 11 months removed from that. This is after the Operation Reinhard. So Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, those death camps have been functioning. We're in the millions of Jews murdered at this point. So just to kind of give you some context of where it is. So I want you to take a second. Good. It's gonna be a rush trying to read all these comments. So awesome. To take a look at his comment, and then a word, a phrase that sticks out to you. What is missing? I mean, clearly he doesn't talk about Jews. So that second question, just to make it pretty clear. And then we can kind of maybe think about some reasons for that. But a word or phrase that sticks out to you, why that stuck out to you, kind of in the chat box. So his Christmas message: humanity owes this vow to those hundreds of thousands who, without any fault on their part, sometimes only because of their nationality or their race, have been marked down for death or gradual extinction. And let me try to read through these. So this comment of that he's not being clear, right? A political in a tone, has some concern, but sometimes, at this point, he knows what's going on. There's plenty of advisors to the Pope. He knows what's going on. That seems incredible. I think it's just like when you think of awe-inspiring, we use the word awesome too much, awesome in a good way, but also just awe. I can't believe that this is what he thought was good enough, right? Nothing about Nazis or Jew. You have gradual extinction. I like this one, this idea that marked down sounds like their death is inevitable. Think of your name is written in the book of life, that it had been marked down. Good question about the vow. I think that's just the vow of Christmas, Christmas in life. And, what does the Christmas season teach us? Understated, vague, unemotional, hedging word choice, right? Yeah, this nationality or race, that Judaism is far more complicated than just a race, a people, a culture, a history, a tradition. There's so much that goes on to try and figure out that humanity owes. That's such a interesting that jumped out to you. Yeah, good, Paul. Here about it. They don't want to offend. He doesn't want to offend or draw attention of the Nazi Party. Now, remember, Catholics are also being persecuted here. Now, again, there's no comparison. We're not playing the Misery Olympics, and all Catholics are not, victims the way that all Jews are targeted for death. And so I want to make that clear. But Poles who are, outside of the Jewish population are, 98% Catholic at this time period, are being murdered en masse as well by both sides, right? We have the murders of the Polish army in Katyn by the Soviets, and we have plenty of examples of Nazis killing Poles that are Catholic Poles as well. So there's definitely danger for Christians and Catholics throughout Nazi Germany as well. So something that, clearly I think that you see in his comments, he's hedging his bets here. He's doesn't want that persecution of Catholics. That's a good way to put it. A very passive statement. I think that's a good way to put it too. like a politician. It's not very clear. This is great. Oh, I did get to the end. That's right. And so, there are a lot of reasons for this, right? So, I don't want to say that his fears are unfounded, or that, there wasn't danger in speaking out, because I think there clearly was. But if we think of the church as this moral high ground, as the Pope being really special, or, the vicar of Christ, or however you view the Pope, at least as a moral person or a global leader, we'd want something better than this, right? The Pope's not having an army and invading, right? They're not going to war. If we think of Roosevelt, who is also at this time period not talking about the Holocaust, they're not thinking about rescue all that much here, or at all. He's thinking about winning the war, but here the Pope can't do that. Like, he's not raising an army to fight Nazism. Like, we can at least give the United States credit for that. But those other things that the Pope is supposed to be are missing in this statement. And some of that has reasons, as you put in the chat, but also it's disappointing, right? We also have to contend, as we kind of move to post-war here, that Pius XII may or may not have known, but we know that there was a route for Nazis to escape Europe through Catholic channels, through Christianity. That there are many German Nazis who escaped persecution, who escaped justice and war crime trials through a path through Italy, going through the Alps, most likely being helped by church officials, whoever they might be, and escaping to South America. That there is a clear path that happens, enough to make it demonstrable and noticeable. Now, do we know the Pope Pius XII's role in that? We don't. It's unclear if he knew or was part of it, but just to add to those contradictions of Pope Pius XII, right? And so as we look to after the war, and after those kind of the dust settles, so to speak, the big change comes from the Second Vatican Council. It comes from this really, really important document, Nostra Aetate, which means in our time. If you don't know that much about the Second Vatican Council, it's called by Pope John the 23rd. So Pius XII dies in 1958, and Pope John the 23rd is elected. He calls a council in 1961, and it lasts 3 years. There's 3 sessions. It meets in 4 years, 62 through 65. And starting in 61, 62, there's a growing sense that there needs to be a document talking about Christianity's relationship to Jews, taking some responsibility for the anti-Jewish teachings that led to Christian Europe, that led to anti-Semitism, and eventually led to Nazi Germany, and led to the millions of people that believed that the Jews were evil or deserving to die or obsessed with blood or money or whatever, right? That there needed to be something that talked about this connection and really the Catholic Church's responsibility in it, and Christianity in general's response to it and necessary. It was going to be just a document about Christians and Jews. That gets debated and eventually compromised to include all religions, a lot because of Israel, because of the fear of Christians being persecuted by Arab states and throughout the world, and all of those kind of geopolitical aspects come into play. But eventually, this document is written and promulgated. It's a fundamental shift in the relationship between the Catholic Church and all other religions. You can thank Jesuit John Courtney Murray, who was influential in recognizing the right to religious freedom, and getting some of the words about religious freedom being really important here. And obviously Murray is heavily influenced by the United States, by Jefferson's claim of religious freedom that he does in Virginia when he's still alive. Obviously, you're talking 1700s, which had not been the church's position that you should have a right to religious freedom. Their position was that you should have the right to believe in Catholicism because we're true and everybody else is wrong, right? So that's a big shift to right to religious freedom, and to acknowledge that there are benefits and truths that exist among other religions, that Christianity is not the one true religion, that there are truths and benefits to learning from all religions. and that if you're a good Jew or a good Hindu or a good Muslim, that you can still go to heaven because there's truth in your faith in God. It does explicitly talk about the relationship that Christianity has with the Jews. It denounces the claim of deicide officially and forcefully, that the Jews were not responsible for the death of Jesus, and it rejects all forms of anti-Semitism. So some kind of really big claims here that really opens the doors, right, which is what the Second Vatican Council is all about, to a new relationship and interreligious dialogue. And there's going to be a lot of stumbling blocks in learning and understanding, but it's enormous. Here you have Pope John Paul II. This is in 1990 when he visits Israel, and he's at the Western Wall here, praying at the Western Wall. The next big document that we'll just kind of highlight today, and then share a testimony and actually wrap up maybe on time. This is a photograph of Pope Francis in Auschwitz. He is in the cell of St. Maximilian Kolbe, who is a Polish Catholic priest who traded places with a Jewish man who was condemned to die and starve in this cell. And St. Maximilian Kolbe switched places with them and was murdered here in this cell that Pope Francis is sitting at. And the man that he traded places with does survive. So kind of a really important story, and that's why he was made a saint. And they have a nice shrine, which is where Pope Francis is in this picture from 15, I think is this trip. But Pope John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis have all made trips to Auschwitz since the Holocaust. In this document in 1998, the church releases another document reflecting on the Shoah, which is the Hebrew word for the Holocaust. The church commits herself to this binding commitment in this special relationship that links Jews and Christians. It acknowledges and asks for repentance from Catholics that did not intercede to stop the genocide. So it doesn't go so far as taking responsibility for anti-Semitism. It doesn't go as far as we want, but is an important document in continuing this new relationship. There's lots of criticisms as the document, separates old anti-Jewish teaching of the church from Nazi anti-Semitism, which, in my personal scholarly view is appropriate, but it also doesn't take responsibility of, the thousands of years that the church fomented and created a culture and a tradition in Christian Europe that laid the foundation for Nazi anti-Semitism to flourish. It ignores the silence of Pope Pius XII as well. So it's not a perfect document, and I wouldn't expect it to be. But it's another one of those steps in recognizing the relationship between Jews and Christians, that the Jewish law and the covenant that Jews have with God are legitimate and valid and true, and that the Catholic Church should not be trying to convert Jews in this way. And so when we look at Pius XII and what he stands for here, these are like Christian Catholic steps to becoming a saint, but he was declared a servant of God in 1990, a venerable in 2009. His next step is to be beatified and then canonized as a saint, but that has been put on pause. Normally, the Vatican archives are closed for 70 years after a pope has died. So he died in 58, so that would be 2028 would be when the archives could be open. But Pope Francis in March of 2020 opened up the Vatican. Scholars have been working in those documents and getting a clearer and a more full picture of what the Vatican was doing and what it was not doing throughout the era of the Holocaust and the wars. So there's plenty of people on both sides who credit Pope Pius XII with saving lots of Jews, as well as plenty of scholars who advocate and push that he, was part of the escape plan for Nazis to get out of Europe after the war as well. So just a walking contradictions. And so I want to actually end with just a personal story. So I kind of give you a big macro view of Catholicism, of Christianity, of the Holocaust, and kind of what was going on there. Some really important documents that changed the relationship between Christianity, especially the Catholic Church, and other religions. And I want to end with an individual Christian's call to help. So regardless of what the huge institution was doing. There are plenty of examples of Christians and Catholics who saved Jews because of their religious beliefs or just for many other reasons. So many rescuers credited their Christian faith as the reason that they risked their lives to save Jews. Obviously, in Poland, the threat is death. And in Poland, pretty much everybody that's not Jewish is Catholic. So, all of the people that are dedicated as righteous among the nations from Poland are most likely Catholic, but that doesn't mean that that's why they did it. So I tried to find someone. This is Ari Van Mansum. He's born in 1920. So he's going to tell you he's going to be in that 15 to 20 year range here. He's born in the Netherlands. He has two sisters and a brother. He's actually a Christian from the Reformed Church, so not Catholic, but a good one. And he's just going to tell your story of how he saved probably hundreds of Jews. And as you listen to him, we're just going to listen to him about a minute. And I'm in the chat box. Just any reactions that you see or heard, any voice intonations, his body language, or just kind of your gut reactions about Ari here.
And slowly on, like a snowball, more and more people approach me for finding a hiding place.
How old were you at that time when this began, when you started to rescue Jews?
It was 22 years of age. Yeah.
What was your first reaction to the request?
I felt obliged to find a place for them, because the consequences were if you couldn't find a place, they would end up in camp and might be killed or murdered, whatever.
Where did that sense of obligation come from?
It came from our vision in our church that we had to help those people who are in need, and we always found were sympathetic to the Jewish people for the simple reason we studied the Old Testament, so we know that they were people of the covenant, and that they so in that reason.
Okay, so then it came partly through your religious...
Through my religious upbringing,
yeah,
that
beliefs
Christians should help people who are in need, yes.
So that was part of your value system?
That's correct, yeah.
I see. When Fritz stayed...
So that's Ari, who, ends up, a friend from his church asks him to accompany a Jewish family to a hiding place, and eventually he helps others. His family hides people. He's arrested in 1943 and sent to a few different concentration camps within Netherlands, and eventually survives. But just in the chat, as we kind of finish up, and thank you, Marcy, for pointing that out. It was my mistake here. Something that jumped out to you, a word, a phrase. Maybe the second question too, if you love the second question, as we're short for time, about some kind of universal call to help people, or why Jews were closer to his thought process to help. So 22, that he's really young, right? He's not much older than our students. Felt responsibility, obligation. I didn't think that no was an option. That's really interesting. It's one of the things that, as people study rescuers, one of the major factors that people chose to rescue is that they were asked, which seems like so simple and so obvious, but there's so many that became rescuers just because they were asked. So a friend asked him for a simple favor he had a rail pass because of the job he had, just to accompany a Jewish couple going from one place to another, just to make sure that they would get there safely. And because he was asked and he did it, then they asked him to do a little bit more and a little bit more. And he ended up saving hundreds of people this way. Ingrained in his worldview. No regret. I think that's a good point. good at seeing the worldview, a good connection, Cynthia, if we think about making the Holocaust relevant, about, you know, it was part of his worldview that these were people that we help people that are in need. Very matter of fact about doing this. Good. Yeah, that he just sees that that you're supposed to help people. One of the things I will tell you just theologically here, he is part of the Reformed Church of the Netherlands, and Protestant biblical scholarship is much more advanced than Catholicism's biblical scholarship in this kind of range between the 1850s and the 1950s. So in this period of about 100 years, Protestants started really reading the Bible for study, like really exegesis, studying the Bible, studying it, the context it was written in, and what we would all call kind of modern biblical scholarship. And Protestants start that first in the 1850s to about the 1950s. And Catholics don't really start reading the Bible that way until after the Second Vatican Council. So he also kind of mentions that as well, that his upbringing and teachings of the Hebrew Bible, what he calls the Old Testament, really has him connect to Jews because he's now learned some of the Jewish stories. And that is part of his religion and his faith. And he recognizes that aspect of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, as being also informative, also a way to learn about faith, also part of his faith, as it is for all Christians, right? So something that's kind of interesting if you're a biblical scholar, as I once was. So I always like to end. Good. I'm glad someone found that interesting. I'm glad I was able to use that information. I can't think of the. You have like the documentary hypothesis about the different sources and of the Hebrew Bible, and then kind of modern biblical scholarship and theory is really started by Protestants first, and then piggybacked by Catholics after the Second Vatican Council. So kind of interesting if you're thinking about, especially for those of you that were religion teachers, about, you know, how are we teaching the Hebrew Bible? Like, it's not just the prequel to Jesus, that there's a lot of value in it in terms of just learning about God. It's the same God. So we're pretty much out of time for today. I'll hang on for a minute or two. If you have any questions in the chat, we're so happy that you joined with us. I always like to end my sessions with this like cool little thing. I don't know how much the math teachers can do this, but I always think of this like, I'm gonna PD. I've had an hour. No, what's something great that I can keep, that I do already in my class, and it's awesome, and I'm gonna keep it. What's something that just needs a little tweak? I do this, but this is a great resource, or a picture, or a photograph, or a technique that I want to add to it. What's something I should stop doing? Like, no, the slides of concentration camp survivors is not actually helpful to my students. It's too traumatic, that kind of thing. And then what's something I should start? Something new that, you know, I haven't thought of, but that I should start. So I always would help that. So with that, again, please stay connected with us. Here's my email is here, as well as kind of everything else about Echoes. Please go on to our website for more webinars like this, as well as online courses and all of that. And there'll be another specific online course for Catholic educators coming up in June that'll look at contemporary anti-Semitism, and it'll also follow another webinar like this, where we'll kind of dive into the kind of Christian actions of anti-Semitism that happened today. So that's all I have for today. Thank you all for joining. It was fun. Glad to dust off some of my